Thank you. Thanks for having me here today. As the lady said, I'm here to share a carer's perspective, and Shane does send his apologies. He would have been here in the room. Yesterday he came down with a cold. This morning his cold was a really bad cold, and we were assessing whether he was going to come or not. I called him at the break, and I think it's nearly a flu. So the last thing we wanted to do was to bring that into the room. There's a lot of nodding heads. I know I don't need to explain to a room of people with kidney challenges what that can do. So he does send his apologies, and I'll say hi. Before I start, I do just want to say how fantastic I think it is that we've got this half-day session at the conference. You know, I think it's absolutely another step in the right direction, and hopefully what we see is this just becomes the norm on these agendas for these conferences worldwide. So this is us. This is Shane up here, and also Blake and Zoe. I know that they won't love this photo, but oh well. And this was us 2 years ago. This was actually on Shane's birthday, and we were in Central Park. We're not travellers, we don't do the trips around, but we wanted to make sure, well, Shane and I really wanted to take Blake and Zoe on a holiday before we got too close to the whole transplant experience that we're still getting very close to. It's been about 25 years since Shane was diagnosed. He wasn't unwell at the time. It was actually, he was going for a new job. He'd finished his apprenticeship, was starting a new job, and went off for a routine medical. And, you know, we just thought that would all go well, and turns out that there was some blood in his urine. And then the journey started from there. I remember the doctor telling us at the time that in about 20 years he'd probably require a transplant. And when you're in your early 20s and someone talks to you about something that's going to happen in 20 years' time, it was just unimaginable. It just wasn't real for us. It did feel like a lifetime away. And that 20 years has been and gone. It's now sort of closer to 25 years, and we're coming closer to needing that transplant. Shane's levels have been hovering in the high teens for some time now. His immunity, his energy levels are dropping noticeably, particularly in the last 12 months. Initially, there was really no change to our lifestyle. You know, we did everything that the doctor said. He took the medication, but really didn't feel any different. It's been really the last 5 years where we've really started to notice a difference and needed to make adjustments. And I guess in the last 12 months where it's really been more noticeable, and that's the biggest change that I've certainly noticed in that time. When we first started planning this session, BEAT-CKD team were talking to us and using the term carer, and I sort of sat with that for a few days, and to me it was sort of yes, absolutely we're carers, but we're also really joint partners in this journey, and that's something that I really want to touch on today. So for Shane and I, it just sort of was a given. You know, we're partners in our life and in our relationship, but we're also partners in this illness as well, and we've both got responsibilities that we have to hold up, and I'll talk about them as well. So I've mentioned before about dropping energy levels. You know, there's Shane suffers terribly from poor sleep, and also changes in medication, you know, after every doctor's visit, and they all have an effect. I'm going to say they've affected Shane's memory. Now, if he was here in the room, and he probably is at home, shaking his head and disagreeing with me, so, but it does. Also his patience, you know, on his mood, really on everything, on the day-to-day. He does often get down on himself. You know, he wants to be able to work full-time. He wants to live life to the fullest. He was the most relaxed and social person that I've ever met when we met all those years ago. Never missed an opportunity to see friends and family, and was always the last person to leave a party. But fast forward to now, and things are really different, and that's really frustrating for Shane. He still tries to be really social, but it's not the same. It's not like he would love it to be. He's often exhausted and doesn't have any energy. Sometimes he doesn't have as much patience as what he would have had a few years ago, and he can get frustrated quite easily, and we know that it's because of the disease that he's got. He's often, as I said, he's hard on himself. He just wants to feel good and be a great husband and a great dad, and he is. But it's different to how he would like it to be and how it used to be even 5 years ago. It's not in the traditional way, but there's also a way that if you can, you know, I like to do a 180 on that and look at it differently. And when I sort of take time to stand back and reflect, and I have to remind him of this a lot, you know, to help him, and also to Blake and Zoe look at things differently as well. He's home more than most dads, and that's something that we're really grateful for. He's also a regular in the school car park. The kids love it when he gets to school. We eat dinner together as a family on most nights, which again is something that we take for granted because it's our norm, but a lot of our friends don't get to do that. He's actively involved in dirt bike riding that he does with Blake quite regularly, and also with Zoe's football and basketball. He knows more school parents than what I do, and sporting parents than what I do, and all too often I'll give them a ring at school pick-up time and there'll be a car full of kids and he's ferrying them around from one place to another. So, you know, I love that, and that's something that we are grateful for, that we can take away from this. The other thing as well is that I guess this entire experience that we've had up until now has made us both more aware of our general health, something that might not have been a priority for us hadn't we had this experience and gone through it. Got here the impacts of CKD, and for me I think that the 2 points that we've got up on the slide there, I just think communication is so critical. You know, it can be the solution to many of our concerns and problems that we have.
Just click next.
There we go. Thank you. I didn't miss that, did I? No. Very good. And you know how we communicate those concerns, so to each other, to our families, to our friends, and to our team of health professionals as well. So communication just has to be two-way for it to be effective. I go to every appointment with Shane now, and they all start the same, even though we're getting really close to transplants. So our nephrologist Tom, who's great, we've been working for him for many years, and he says, "So how are you, Shane?" And Shane says, "Yeah, good, thanks." And I sit there and I go, "What?" You know, there's so many things, and I can see actually some people in the room who are going, "Yeah, that's us." So I'm glad that resonates with you. And I sit there and I go, "What about I think about the last appointment. What about the gout? What about the sleepless nights that you're having?" And the list goes on. You know, I think as partners or observers of our loved ones as they're going through this, we can also have often different perspectives and see different things as well. So that's why I think it's critical that we have a voice in those appointments as well. I always write notes in the lead up to an appointment. I encourage Shane to as well. I do that because I can be thinking of something and then you walk in and it slips your mind. I write down the answers too, so once I go to the appointments I always write them down because we hear different things, so then we go away and compare what we've heard. We find it helpful. I've spoken to other patients who have also found that helpful, and so with some of the group that we've worked together in the lead up to today, we've developed a checklist that you guys might find helpful as well, that we'll talk about in the next session in the panel discussion, so we'll share that with you. I'll move on here. Actually, before I do, I'll just say we're both really happy with our nephrologist. My example before wasn't a sign on him, because he'll always make sure that we cover those important things. But I think it's just important to make sure that there's a balanced voice in those appointments as well. So I think the relationship between patients with a chronic illness like CKD and the carer, from my perspective anyway, I said before, I do think it's a partnership. My role in our partnership between Shane and I is to keep us organised. I try my best to support Shane as much as I can, but I know that he needs more than just me. So what I do is encourage him to continue to be social, even sometimes when he doesn't feel like it. Now, I'm not overly pushy, but sometimes it's just that extra little bit of, just go. If it's only an hour, that's okay, come home. That can sometimes make a big difference. Everyone's different. Some people like to have a stack of information. Others can find that a little bit overwhelming. You need to find the right balance for you. But I'm the kind of person who does like to have information, but reliable information and factual information. I don't like speculation. It can make me feel a little bit nervous and a bit ill-informed. But I feel like I've got more control when I've got the facts. And sometimes that can be, sometimes you have to have a direct conversation to get those facts. I also try and avoid self-diagnosis and not get on Google too often. I save questions for our specialists. I think another reason why sessions like this are just so critically important is because, I find anyway, I find incredibly empowering for patients and families to get this sort of information. So I've been taking copious amounts of notes as I've been sitting there of things that I now want to go and look into more about or connect with different people. Again, I'm seeing lots of nods, so I'm really pleased that you've been able to take that away as well. Shane's end of the bargain, so I talked about our partnership before, so he needs to manage his medication, which he does really well, eat well, rest when he needs to, and talk to me about what's going on for him and how he's feeling. And for all of those, he does really well, but probably the last one with talking to me about how he's feeling, I guess there can be some, that's a little bit hit and miss sometimes. So for the carers in the room, I find that sometimes those long drives that you've got, they're a great chance to start to have these conversations. So as we were preparing for this session, Emily asked me what I've learned in my role in supporting Shane. And I guess my answer to that is that, we're continually learning. Every week, every month, every appointment that we go to, there's something new. There's some more information, there's a new development, there's something happening with Shane and the disease that we come away with. We talk to our friends and our family who ask us how everything's going. And although they're fantastic and they offer support, they really, really don't get it. And I guess that's not, how could they? They're not living with this every day. But please don't let that stop you talking to them. I still, even last night, we had a great conversation about how things were travelling because, people want to be able to help as much as they can. And if you're not talking to them about what you're going through, this is what I've found anyway, and if you're not sharing with them, then they don't know what to do. They can't help if they don't know what's going on. When Shane's kidney function dropped to 17% last year, our nephrologist suggested we start the process to find a suitable donor. So without hesitation, because I'm the organiser, I went, yep, good, let's get started. Let me know what we need to know. And we started the first round of tests. And as we got through each stage, instead of feeling more comfortable that, yep, we've got this, I actually started to feel more nervous. And anxiety levels were really rising. And I couldn't quite work that out, why that was happening. And I wasn't honest with Shane. I didn't talk about it, so I guess I had to take some of my own advice there. Because my role in our relationship is the fixer. I kind of fix things if they go off track, keep things organised. And yet here I was in a situation that I didn't have any control over. I didn't know if I'd be able to fix it, and that was really scary at the time. If I wasn't a match, I wouldn't be able to fix it for him, and then what would I do? What would my role be? So my GP picked up on my nervousness and made me talk about it. And that was probably the best thing that could have happened, because it was a really hard conversation that we had to have, but it was one that we had to have. And what she said was that all I could control was whether I tried to be a match or not. Whether I was completely out of our hands. And once I was able to sort of accept that, I was then in a much better position to think more rationally and just go through the rest of the journey. Once I had that conversation with our GP and I was finally honest with Shane about it, he then confessed that he'd felt the same way. And so if only we'd talked to each other a couple of months earlier, it would have been a lot less stressful for both of us. We're one of the lucky ones though. And, the worry about, all that worry we now know wasn't needed as much, because we got the news last year that I can donate. So when the time's right, bring it on. So, thank you. I talked before about our role in the partnership, and it's also the peacekeeper, I guess. I just try and be kind to Shane, the family, to everyone who's involved in our world, because I know that with what we're going through, we really appreciate it when people are kind to us as well. But the main focus of this conference is about research. And I try and keep up to date, looking at different websites all the time and different groups and lots of information, and lots about different trials and new developments. But as a consumer who's living, with Shane and I going through this partnership and living with this disease, I just find it's quite hard to keep up with, and it can be really overwhelming. And sometimes it can actually get our hopes up, only then to be let down. I think if there's improved ways of communicating research information to consumers, even with a centralised body where all this information is, I've sat here for the last few hours and loved all the presentations that I've seen and taken lots of notes. I would love to see that all come together so that the people who can't be here today or couldn't join online have access to that. I think that's really a positive thing that we can take out of it. Also, Craig and Kevin touched on my next point, as did Amber Williamson, who spoke at a similar conference in September. And one thing I'm really concerned about is the financial impact that CKD has on patients and their families. So yes, there are the obvious costs that we see every time we hand the card over. The doctors and the specialist costs, the medications, the appointment car parking, all that sort of thing. But then there's the costs that are so much harder to really quantify. The cost of not necessarily being able to work full-time or work at all, and not just for patients but also for caregivers and other family members. I do think it's a really important issue from both the patient and the family perspective that does need to be explored more. I'd also love to see continued funding into the development of artificial kidneys. Just imagine, I'll just leave that point there. We've heard today that, right throughout today actually, the symptom burden. And I know for us and for everyone here, that's a real priority for patients and their partners. It's these issues that really need to be considered in discussions about treatment decision making and informing and educating patients and their families and their partners of likely symptoms before they experience them. So not waiting for something to happen and go and ask your doctor, but to be proactive about that. We'd love to see more of that. From our own personal experience, the health of the kidneys is the main focus of our appointments, and so it should be. So that absolutely, we don't want that to change. But 5 or 10 years ago, we would have loved to have been more informed about some of the possible symptoms and side effects that were most likely going to come our way, because we weren't prepared for that. We also need to think about, I think, what is needed to best support the person living with CKD. One of the slides before just put it so eloquently, and I can't remember the exact words, but I sat there and went, yep, that's exactly what I'm getting at. Supporting patients to engage with a broad range of services. So we go and see our specialists. That's probably the core of what we do. But there's so many other services out there that we could potentially tap into if we need them. And I'm talking about things like, could be a dietitian, could be a social worker, could be about exercise, like the sessions earlier on. Often people just aren't aware of what's available. I say that because I know that we weren't aware of what was available. And so please, I encourage you to ask the members of your team what else might be available to you. I know that there's a lot of representatives here today from Kidney Health Australia. I encourage you to visit their website. Details have been up on the screen. There's some great information and resources explaining the types of support that you can tap into, or even speak to one of the members here from Kidney Health Australia after the session today. And finally, the last thing that I would love to see researched and looked into a bit more is, do we know about the impact supporting someone with kidney disease, and what does that have on partners, carers and family members? There was an online question about that earlier as well that came through. Whether that be partners or carers of someone newly diagnosed with CKD or someone who's receiving dialysis multiple times a week, there's an impact from one end to the other. an example there would be, you know, what are the impacts of helping someone who needs to get to dialysis a few times a week? When there's work, there might be children, there might be other dependents involved in the equation. How do you make that work? What adjustments do you need, and what support's available? They're the sorts of things that we would love to see some more support on. Also, what it does to the family unit, you know, the carer's emotional well-being and lifestyle. And perhaps we need to, I think, potentially look at supporting both patients and caregivers and partners with things like stress management or building resilience and some coping mechanisms as well. I know that I would find that helpful, and there's lots of nods I'm seeing as well. Stephanie talked in the first session about the experts. And I think she said the experts, they're the ones who determine what the research priorities are and make decisions every day. And those decisions are for us in the room. And it made me realise that even though we probably don't want to be, we're all experts as well because of what we've been through. We're experts on our own journey. And so I think that there's so much value in that expertise being shared with the experts so that the research priorities, the research dollars, and the focus can be on the areas that we really believe it needs to be on. So before I wrap up, I just want to thank BEAT-CKD Research and Collaboration and Kidney Health Australia for convening today's event, and also for Baxter Healthcare for their support, which has enabled the live streaming. Also, of course, to Shane and to Emily for helping bring this all together. So before we close and move to the panel discussion, I also just want to say as well that I hope you found today interesting and took something away, but also to what I've been trying to talk about, I guess, is helping you start a conversation, and whether that's with your partner, your carer, your health professional, or the support services that are available. But if anything that I've talked about conjured up some emotion or some concern or anything like that, please reach out for that help, because it is there and available to you. So thank you.
Thank you, Kylie. Thank you for sharing that journey, and thank you for teaching me to be a better doctor today. That's what I'm going to walk away with, things that I can put back into my practice from hearing your story. So thank you. We're going to hold questions because I'd now like to invite the panel. So Kylie, back up on the stage. So we wanted to have a panel discussion about about this very important issue of how to improve patient-provider communications. So we've got Kylie speaking. I'd like to invite Nikki to come up as well. So Nikki has already had an incredible impact at this meeting. She spoke at the Global Policy Forum and provided her perspectives, and has been on television and in the Congress newspaper, and really doing an incredible job getting her story out. So Nikki is a member of our BEAT-CKD Consumer Advisory Board. She's a physiotherapist. She's a researcher. She's a mum. She's an advocate. She lives in Armidale. Hi Armidale. Yep. Shout out to Armidale. She's just enrolled in a PhD with the BEAT-CKD team at the University of Sydney, where her area of interest is in improving access to treatment for rural and remote patients living with kidney disease. So I'm putting all of that first because, in addition to that, but not in front of that or ahead of all of that. Oh, and she's a filmmaker, she has IGA nephropathy, and she received a kidney transplant from her brother in 2014. But that does not define her, and that is something that Nikki has taught me in the interactions that we've had. So I'd also like to invite Matthew Joyce to represent the kidney specialists. We've actually picked the nicest kidney specialist in Australia to represent us, so don't let us down. So Matthew is a professor and chair of medicine at the University of Tasmania, and he's a kidney specialist at Royal Hobart. He did do some of his training in Adelaide, which is where all the niceness comes from, and he's involved in clinical trials around kidney disease. He's a member of the International Society of Nephrology that is running this meeting. He is currently chairing the ANZ Data Registry, which is the database for really important clinical information about patients in Australia and New Zealand with kidney failure who are on dialysis or who have a transplant, and really helps us a lot in the work that we do in caring for patients with those problems. And he's really passionate about improving the lives of patients with kidney disease and effective clinical care, and a lot of his work and research focuses around that. And then I'd like to ask Jade Ryan to come up. We've got Jade. So Jade is a dialysis coordinator and nurse practitioner candidate at the Royal Melbourne Hospital, and she's worked as a renal nurse for over a decade in a variety of roles, including in dialysis nursing, acute renal ward nursing and home dialysis training. And most recently, she's the main patient point of contact for dialysis logistics at the Royal Melbourne in her role as a dialysis coordinator. So I think it's worth taking the time to explain the panel today, because as we go on with the discussions, you'll be able to see the different perspectives, the different expertise they bring to what we're going to be talking about today. So I would like to not be talking very much in this session. And I would really love for interaction and commentary and real engagement from the audience. So don't be shy. This is a forum where we are really here to learn from each other, and that can't happen if everyone's